Shalom, I'm Rabbi Jonathan Ginsburg of the Ezra Habonim Niles Township Jewish Congregation. This video will try and tell you the story, the true story about Hanukkah. When most Jews think about Hanukkah, they think about lighting a menorah because of a story in the Talmud that says that when the ancestors, the Maccabees, entered the temple after it had been desecrated by the Syrian Greeks, they found one cruse of oil that could last one day, and the miracle was it lasted 8 days until a runner came back, a rider on a horse with more oil. Well, in the whole Talmud, which takes up a whole shelf in my office, the only thing about the holiday that happened closest to the writing of the Talmud was that one little paragraph. Why? Well, the Jews were under the authority of Rome, and the last thing the Jews wanted to do under the authority of Rome was tell the true story of a successful rebellion against the Greeks who preceded the Romans in trying to control the Jews. That would have upset the Romans very much, and so the Jews and the rabbis writing the Talmud tried to pass off the real story. And one of the fascinating things about Hanukkah is that the way in which the Jewish people have interpreted and understood the story has changed according to our needs. So what happened? Well, in 586 BCE, the Babylonians, today's Iraqis, destroyed the Holy Temple and drove the Jews to Babylonia. And then the Persian king Cyrus defeated the Babylonians, that's Persia in Iran today, and they let the Jews go back and rebuild the temple, which they did. And then in 333 BCE, Alexander the Great conquered the Persians, and he instituted Greek Hellenism among the whole area. 10 years later, he died, and his empire split into two factions. And when you get to 165 BCE or so, the Ptolemies in the south were Egypt, and the Seleucids in the north, in Syria approximately, they were in control at the time. They had defeated the Ptolemies. And Antiochus Epiphanes IV was the tyrannical ruler. Well, he tried to quash Judaism, and we believe it's because he got advice from an assimilated Jewish high priest who told him the best way to keep the Jews under control was to tell them to forbid them to observe Jewish practice, which was the stupidest advice in history. Because as soon as Antiochus Epiphanes IV, whom the Jews call Antiochus the Evil, instituted those prohibitions about Jewish observance, the Jews rebelled, led by Mattathias and his 5 sons, Judah. Now the name Maccabee comes from the initials to the Hebrew expression, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you, O Lord, among the mighty. It also means the hammer, and that was the banner that the Jews carried into battle, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Well, as you know, Judah and his brothers and father and the guerrilla army defeated the Seleucids and drove them back into Syria. And they took the temple, which had been desecrated by the Syrian Greeks, and they fixed it up. Now, 6 weeks before Hanukkah, we have a biblical holiday, Sukkot. And the Jews were not able to celebrate the holiday, and we learned this from the books in the Apocrypha called the Maccabees. And so when they rededicated the temple, they marched around for 8 days, which is the 7-day holiday, and 8 days in the diaspora, waving the lulav branches and singing Hallel. And that's really why the holiday is 8 days. There's another rabbinic legend that when the ancestors, the Maccabees, entered the temple, they found spears stuck in the ground with 8 candles burning. So clearly the idea of lights and fire and 8 days is the real issue, and the story in the Talmud was one of the many stories floating around at the time. In any case, that doesn't change the fact that the mitzvah is still to light the menorah with candles each night to remember the miracle. Well, then you move into the Talmudic period, sometime around 200 to 500, when the rabbis were analyzing and discussing this, and they tried to suppress the idea of the battle. In fact, the Haftorah that our sages instituted for the Sabbath of Hanukkah comes from the prophet Zechariah, and it has the line, and this is why probably it was selected. It begins with lights, that you should light a fire, and it also says, not by might nor by power, but by spirit, saith the Lord, to try to keep the zealots from reacting against Rome. Well, of course they did. There was a rebellion in the year 70. There was a rebellion in the diaspora in Egypt in 115. There was another rebellion against Rome in 132 to 135. So the rebellious spirit, the desire of the Jews to be free, never ended. In any case, so Hanukkah basically became a holiday of peace and spirit and hoping. But the rabbis who wrote the prayers in the prayer book knew that the Jewish people could read the truth, and so they instituted a prayer we recite every day, several times a day during Hanukkah, called Al Hanisim, which really tells about God helping vanquishing the mighty. And that has kept the truth alive. Well, when we get to modern times, we have other interesting issues. First of all, those who live in the diaspora surrounded by Christians know that Christmas is a holiday that's observed by many of our neighbors, and Jews feel very much in the minority. And so Hanukkah has become much bigger than it originally was. But, on the other hand, living in America, Hanukkah tells the true story of Western civilization in America more than any other holiday in anybody's culture, because it is quintessentially the holiday of political and religious freedom. The Maccabees fought off the Greeks to be able to be independent, which they were for 100 years until the Romans took over, and to be religiously free, just like the Puritans did. But we also had a pacifistic period, certainly during the Vietnam War era, and hence we have a very popular Hanukkah song based on those ancient words of Zechariah written by Debbie Friedman, "Not by might nor by power, but by spirit alone, saith the Lord." And today, perhaps the main issue for modern American Judaism is assimilation, the worry that Jews will stop living intensely Jewish. And so you have the beautiful song by Peter, Paul, and Mary, "Don't Let the Light Go Out." It's lasted for so many years. So you can see what a wonderful way in which we adapt Hanukkah to the particular needs of the time, and the holiday is observed. One more thing about the Hannukah. There was a debate in the Talmud as to whether you should light one candle the first night, and then two, and then three, and then four, or you should light 8, and then 7, then 6, then 5. And so, of course, the rabbis compromised, and so, as you know, we light 1, and then 2, and then 3, but we light them as if we're lighting 8, then 7, then 6, because we start with the newest candle on the left and light towards the right, the spirit of compromise. Hope this helps edify you and clarify aspects of Hanukkah.